Very good morning to you all. Folks gathered around here for this discussion. As I was reflecting, I'm a knowledge worker. I'm very bad at this opening statement, so I did go to ChatGPT to construct something, which I thought should be funny as well, and it came up with some ridiculous stuff around a joke around going to an ATM and getting error 404, cash not found. Cash not available as to cash not found. So I'll just dispense with that. And I was just sort of thinking through as to, are we real? I mean, we are undeniably living in a very exciting time. Now, this is such a cliche, simply because, I started working from 1989 as a developer, right? And I've been predominantly in the banking financial services space. And I have never experienced, there's not been a single year from there on till now where this feeling hasn't been there. I think every year, it just feels like we are living in an undeniably remarkable time, right? And that's simply because banks have taken to technology like fish to water, and banking thrives on technology as a backbone, right? We've seen a massive evolution. And today, instead of reminiscing about the past, I want to sort of set a theme where we want to look at what will it take for us to navigate from here into the future, right? Everything comes with a certain set of challenges and opportunities. Having built a business, having built tech to bring us till here, how difficult is it to start reshaping what you have to address the challenges of the future? So we have, I think we could not get better set of people, India's largest private bank and India's SME focused bank, right, who are at the cutting edge of tech to speak about this topic. So I want to set a baseline. So my first question, and Ramesh, we could just start with you and then move forward. So I think my first question would be, what sort of challenges and opportunities you see for your business from the current vantage point? And then from there on, we could just move into, how to address them with tech. Yeah.
Thanks. I think I'm audible. Yeah, thank you. I think it also goes back to the earlier sessions. If you look at it, the problems across the banking industry or the challenges are the same, right? It is basically today, if you ask me, the challenge of digital distribution, the nimbleness with the banks can act on technology, and they're harnessing some of the future technology. I think if you look at it, and that's a challenge because I also think there will be regulatory angles, compliance angles when you adopt the future technology. So banks have to do a little bit of a balancing act. So if you see these three boxes, it's very important to understand that number one, the digital distribution is going to be a very, very challenging time. As we go deeper into the hinterland, we look at technology very differently. I always say this in many of the forums, that we are so enamored by the UI UX that we do on the metro side, Gen Z. It's very funky looking, one touch experience. But nobody talks about an app being as multilingual as it can get when it comes to rural experience, or as simple that it can get. A WhatsApp, for example, today, there are hardly 5 clicks here. But, so many, more than, 50, 60 crore people use that, right? So I think the banks have a challenge to understand from a technology angle and a digital angle, how do I kind of make assets that make sense to each of these segments rather than having one technology approach, which I think we're coming out of it, we're doing it rapidly, but I think there is still some more work. And that will set the digital distribution, game nicely up. And I see there's a very, 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 there is a lot of science behind it. It's not just talking about it, right? Second, like I said, the competition from fintechs will continue to be there. It's a challenge because what I see is the agility. It's not going away, but I think it's far more balanced compared to last 2 years because banks are learning to become more technologically agile. while fintechs are learning to be more regulated. So it's I think the balance will play out in maybe in couple of more years, and you will see an equilibrium there. Some banks will adopt, given the regulatory structure and the compliance structure, still to be far agile, and there will be fintechs who will come into a regulatory fold and still be able to deliver. So I think that's the larger level. I think these are the two large, and the third, like the unknown of the technology. I mean, I do see a lot of talk around Gen AI, and then of course quantum computing is lurking in the corner. I do see that as a technology that's going to disrupt. How do we, as bankers, adopt first? And I think Shanti alluded to that in the earlier slide. The focus is moving from buying technology. Banks have been very guilty of buying technology. I'll be very honest about it. Every bank. I mean, it's not a comment on any particular bank. I think the shift to being a technology developer or a technology maker is very critical. I think that, to my mind, is a very subtle area. Of course, you can't develop everything. You don't want to develop treasury systems. You don't want to do, HR systems. But places where you need to really be nimble, whether it's mobile applications, payment applications, you will need to think very differently on harnessing new age technologies. And I think that's where I think somehow adoption of those technologies and bringing them into the technology platform and enable clients would be the third challenge. So those are the three challenges that I see from a tech banking perspective. Over to Mahesh, you can.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. Much appreciated. I think I completely agree with Ramesh in terms of his articulation in terms of some of the key technology challenges and the way we look at it. I would only say that today what is happening is the expectations on the front end, whether it is an individual or a corporate, is pretty much to say that how do I create an instant gratification capability? Whether you do it on the retail side, whether you do it on the liability or the asset side or the corporate side, across each of the services, there is an expectation that you deliver capability services pretty much instant, and you also infuse it with the right amount of decision-making capabilities. Because you don't do it, there is competition across there who's able to get that faster. So I think the bigger, I would say the challenge is to in terms of enabling and sort of prioritizing. I would say prioritizing what do you really need to do and what are the top 10 things that will make a change for the bank in its growth cycle. We can't be everywhere. Now, everyone can't be a banker to everyone, and it cannot be across the spectrum, because then you will probably be not necessarily disrupting it. So you really need to, from a business and tech perspective, one of the key things we sit down always, and it is like a collaborative approach that we try to take, is that what is it that you really want to do that will change an experience, which means better service, better availability of data, right levels of security, and ensuring the right levels of risk coverage. And last but not the least is in terms of ensuring compliance. So when you look at all of these aspects, there is always going to be how do you manage challenge vis-a-vis your expectations, vis-a-vis what we can deliver. This triaging is a constant, I would say, evolution. And when we look at this, it's about how we incrementally deliver to those prioritized and make it work. So challenges, I would say, is across the board, because technology is also changing at pace and business expectations are also evolving. So to be able to sieve through all of that and funnel it to your possibly the key ones, which is going to give you bang for the buck always, is going to be critical. And that's something which is not easy, but it is an involved conversation that helps us. I think that's something that everyone has to practice. Otherwise, you just throw a lot of money at it, and the outcomes may not be viable enough for any business.
So, Mesh, one of the things which you've done really very well, right, if I remember, is your API banking, right? So you had constructed solutions specifically for e-commerce vendors around refunds, returns, and you had this entire API banking carved out as a unit, which was almost like a service, right? When you constructed this, I mean, given the fact, and Ramesh alluded the fact that, banking has typically always bought technology. Now, on top of a bought technology, COTS kind of a layer, which is very rigid, which has been designed for a sort of very different era. Just talk us through some of the challenges and how you negotiated them as you went into the API banking for it.
So the way I look at it, Angraj, is
with a focus on, let's just talk about the tech stack and, the kind of challenges as an organization and learnings, I mean, if there are.
So obviously, when the bank started off in this journey of being a digital front end, especially in the payments processing, right? Because with everything that it centered itself around is how do I go to the larger ecosystem and bring them into the fold from a payment processing perspective. Now, if you had to do it, the ask was, how do I do it at a very fraction of a second? Yeah. And how do I drive scale? And what does that do enable for the bank? It gives you the car balances at the end of the day, yeah. And it gives you low cost funds for the banking perspective. And there is also downstream capabilities in terms of understanding the data that you can probably cross utilize down the line. So these were high level imperatives. As a bank, I think it was very important, and we've done that very well, is in terms of carving out an entire end-to-end team. In terms of saying the only mission is how do we scale this business. The tech stack, now you could name it, you can get it. I don't think the commoditization of the tech stack exists. But what is important, I think where we've put a lot of effort and energy towards it, is in terms of defining what needs to be built on top, which will be available as a cookie cutter approach, a sandbox based approach to bring on board partners at a very short pace. Two, how do you drive scale? Because when you allow, say, for an NEFT payments or a settlement payments, or you have IMPS at a large scale at about, say, 900 to 1000 TPS transactions per second, it is about how you design the architecture first. That's very important because you can't, once you start rapid scale, you can't keep unraveling mysteries around that, because that doesn't help. You can't keep doing stenting process every now and then. You have to be careful about it. So there was a lot of focus on design, a lot of focus around terms of what you build on top of a base application platform that you got. I use the word platform, not an application, a platform, which is the gateway and the enterprise service bus that you bought. On the back of it, you then say, what are those capabilities in terms of APIs and microservices that you really start to build? And how do you present it to the partners for them to get onboarded fast? And last but not the least, I think it's very important for us to understand is, don't let it be a tech solution, make it a product. Because that product journey is what makes the change, because then you end up creating a solution around what it is and say, how do we as a bank enable the partner to understand their problem and give it as a solution to them? Which means whether you process the payment and give them the settlement instruction within an instant, and how do you help them there? A lot of the partners that we process payments essentially expect that we run through the night at very high transactions per second. So in the morning, the merchants have the money. Why is that? It's because we understood their problem to be able to solve for it and build that ecosystem to support it. So technology enabling to understand the customer's problem statements and being able to build those right kind of service layers around the APIs, and more importantly, provide that intuitive front end is what has helped. And that's true for anything. The API banking, when you dedicate an entire game plan to it, make it a product organization, and then drive the outcomes, has helped us reach some good scale. I think that's what I would say, and that's the results are there to see where we are probably pretty much on the high in terms of top 1 and 2 in terms of NEFT or RTGS or IMPS processing. I think our acquiring is over 95% of our entire volume base, which is where we are, because that's where we focused our attention towards.
So Ramesh, continuing the same topic, right, on the architecture side. I mean, from a purity of architecture perspective, headless is a way to go, right, when it comes to core systems. But the core systems are not built to be headless. For a bank of your size and scale and innovating at the pace at which you do, you are forced to, sort of go that route, right, rather than purely from a purity of how does this journey look like? Because at one end you would have intermittent solutions coming in, which themselves become an alternate stack. And looking forward, going ahead, where you are very clear that, headless is the way to go, you need to have services around, we need to be able to have services at a granular level taken off, hollowing the core, if I use your term, right? How do you think through this process? Because it's a very disruptive thought process. You have a bank to run. So just want to understand your thinking around the approach, right? How do you approach this?
I think that's a great question, because that's also very close to the kind of experiences that my bank has gone through over a few years, right? See, what is the fundamental problem? If one has to understand, you always keep saying, why does it take so much difficulty for a bank to run its systems without any kind of, breakdowns, right? It's a very simple question. I mean, you keep hearing, a lot of tweets, a lot of, social media comments. You must understand the basic difference between fintech and the bank. See, finally, the transaction always hits the bank and the bank has to commit the transaction. The final right always comes to the bank. Just to kind of make it very simple, you can do any digital ecosystem. It all comes back to one database, and that database has to be there standing. And, and what has happened is very interesting. Pre-2015, banks were buying platforms, and these platforms are built on a particular architecture, which I call as monolithic architecture. So it's a bit like every transaction keeps coming and hitting a particular database. All was okay. Suddenly, imagine this is like a dam, which is full of water, and one fine day the dam bursts. It's exactly the same thing that happened with the UPI movement, right? Suddenly, from a TPS of less than 80 TPS to 100 TPS, utility is going to 2,500 TPS in a short span of 4 to 5 years. And all the transactions, whether it's a treasury guy doing $1 billion payment or whether it's a 5 rupee debit coming, it finally comes to one core banking. So what happened? I think the banks got their design wrong. And I'm being very, I'm making this statement because that's reality for every single bank. Monolithic databases, when you put everything down to one particular database, it is going to kind of burst out. So I think we have to fundamentally reimagine, and now the problem is that it's not so easy to reimagine, especially when you start a startup from zero. It's very easy because you can know the latest components, you can get the latest technology, you can build it agile because there are no customers. It's the same like how we moved from a land phone to a mobile phone. We just kind of avoided the entire land phone kind of generation briefly, but largely we could avoid. That advantage was not there with the banks. So they had to have a two-pronged strategy. How to run their existing platforms and make them resilient at the same technology, with the same technology. And at the same time, they have to start thinking on what the new age technology would look like. And that's where I think our design principles come in. So we propagate a very clear design philosophy in the bank now, which is kind of still in progress, but we substantially started moving. It's called active design, which means I write something in Mumbai, I should be able to write the same thing in Bangalore at the same time to give the resilience online, real time. So very interesting stuff. Database theorems come from a theory called CAP theorem, which a lot of fintechs have beaten, or rather have very close to have beaten them. And we are still kind of getting there. So the banks have to understand that active architecture is very critical. The second most important thing, again, the last panel alluded to that. Banks are product centric. So when they thought about, so you build credit cards, you build retail asset system, you build core banking, you build treasury. For a lot of people have this myth that everything in the bank is around core banking, not necessarily. In fact, less than 30% of the transactions go on core banking. That is the reality of a large bank. Okay, so you put a whole complex set of systems. So you have 3-4 large applications, and just think about a simple thing like putting an address change. You have to go to 4 different places to actually make an address change on a banking system. That's not viable because your thought product. So the credit card team said, okay, all credit card address changes go on credit card systems. Banking guys said in core banking, retail assets and mortgage go and do their product thought process. That is changing today. So in the earlier era, core banking was at the center. We all centered with core banking as the center and said everything will go there. It's core banking, credit cards, and so. Today, I think the fundamental foundational design shift that's happened is the data has to sit in the center as we look at the future. Why I'm saying data? The minute you bring data at the center of the discussion, it's one customer. If you just imagine the bank can create an Aadhaar inside the bank, which means one time you take customer address, data, everything. Why do your journeys require all along every time a new KYC, a new set of documents, a new set of data points? So I think these are 2 fundamental, foundational, I think, changes that we have to do as we move along, which is getting to active, and basically putting the data back at the center of the entire the technology construct. And then, of course, you overlay with API, which Mahesh spoke about from a front-end perspective. And then you get to the design thinking on the front end, like a fintech, to make your apps actually rich. And then, of course, the data in the center also would kind of be consumed from the machine learning and AI revolution that's coming through. So I think that certain shift in the design is a very critical aspect. And I think banks that can think in the direction and can execute, that's when they will be able to compete with scaled up fintechs or big techs actually.
So Ramesh, added to what you said, you have the additional burden of being able to deliver those amazing experiences through tech, right, on the front end, on the engagement layer. Now, all of this requires a very different mix of skill sets to come in, right? So just how are you thinking about this skill set mix, given the fact that you said, hey, you want to be self-sufficient, on being able to develop some of these things? I'm going to add on to the gentleman's question about retaining people, right? To be able to create the right environment for folks to stay interested. How are you thinking about this?
I think it's a brilliant question, because fundamentally the nature of the skills in a banking industry is changing. Earlier we used to say anybody who's passed out, CA, BCom, is fit for the bank. Right. I think those days are kind of it's kind of dwindling down. Today we need system engineers, designers, architects, cloud engineers, microservices champions. We need a lot of this kind of data science specialists. So I think clearly the shift has happened, and that's why talent is a very critical part. And banks found it very difficult initially because the way the banking system runs in terms of the hierarchy model, in terms of the grades and the way people move up the chain, it's very structured. It comes from a very structured thought process. Try and tell a young generation today that, you are a VP, senior VP, deputy VP. He says, what is this nonsense? That's the reality, right? I think the first thing is to acknowledge that the world has around us changed, and the talent that is coming through, the young talent, it has a very different set of demand. And to kind of make them, and it's not about all the time about, there is compensation on the table, for sure. I'm not denying whether it's stock options, whether it's compensation, but they play a certain part. I think beyond that, you have to also get them to show the mission and what are they building, what is the purpose, right? And of course, and then incubate it into a center where they feel comfortable. So in our case, we've been very clear that most of our development tech talent doesn't sit in the centralized IT offices, because the minute you bring them to centralized IT offices, the same thought process, same kind of culture kind of sets in. So we've kind of moved them into a factory construct. So today, the way we look at it, you have a set of startups or factories that are purely developer driven. The product team sits inside these factories. And then, of course, the compliance units, so the information security, risk management. So all of them actually go into this pod. And you have these multiple startup, small pods, 150, 200 people. You don't need many people. In 100, 150 is a nice number because that's when the teamwork and the mission in life comes in. So I think it's very important to pivot to a structure. And then each of these startups are given a mission, or I call these factories actually within our bank structure. And we tell them that, look, you're going to build India's largest scalable mobile app, or you're going to build the largest distribution app that you're seen, largest wealth app that one has seen. And then you rally around, and then of course you use the new concepts of, that's DevOps, whether it's CI/CD pipelines, all of them are things that come, and the kind of, coding and the kind of application stack that you choose. Open source is a very interesting option. I think fundamentally you have to ring fence the cultural aspects and move them into smaller groups. And then, like I said, we obviously have to fight the compensation and the other battle. That's not going anywhere. But the largest thing is the mission and the purpose of what you are building.
Yeah.
And if you rally at the young team around that, you can definitely get miracles.
Mahesh, how are you thinking about this at Yes Bank?
Well, I think I fairly well echo what Ramesh was looking at. So and today with the changing face of tech, trying to look at the structured hierarchical model with trying to build on skill sets and being able to retain them. I think more importantly, being able to retain and give a career path to them is a challenge in the standard model. So effectively, similar to what he says, here what we've also done is essentially brought them into, he said squad, we've got garage. The outcomes are same. But effectively trying to bring the entire ecosystem of business, of product guys and the techies, and more importantly, empower them. Yeah. Say, listen, like you rightly said, empower them to be able to say, you're going to generate X, and you now are going to use this kind of a tech framework to be able to drive an outcome, and look at what you go. The one thing that we are trying to now change on the back of all of this is, can I do a differentiated comp structure? It's not easy in a bank. There's a lot more other noise that will come in, but we're looking to see if we can create a differentiated. Now, fair enough. Why should it be as different than a sales guy? Yeah. He makes his money by selling something better. Can we not give them the same? We may not be able to give ESOPs, but can we give them the opportunity to say value creation? You create value and you earn. So we're looking at a few such things. And at the end of the day, also what we're trying to do is give them opportunities from cross-skilling. So folks who've been in the system for long, we're saying, hey, why don't you also cross-skill yourself in certain areas which today, like a DevOps, folks who come in from a standard waterfall approach, we are encouraging them to say that we help you go into the DevOps mode. And for that, if you need to change your mindset and this thing, it's very important. The one thing that has helped us is, it's interesting given the fact that we have a fairly large base of fintechs with whom we engage on our payment rails. We've been able to get them to talk to us, get them to talk to the developing community in terms of how do they develop fast, what do they do better, what are some of the areas that they focus on, and that's helped because some of the traditional practices start getting broken down. Now I can say that we got one of the largest cab hiring entities to come and talk how they drive changes every day 4 times. Every day 4 times. Now, unheard of in a banking industry where you will go through some X number of processes. That helped because suddenly it opened up a different mindset. So towards that, I think multiple areas, soft skills, career shift in terms of compensation and in terms of domain capabilities. So I think a lot of these are there, and we also now have been also collaborating with campus to probably seed in a lot of the programs up front.
Cool. So, I mean, I had a lot more questions, but I think we exceeded our time way beyond. So thank you very much for a very insightful conversation. I hope this was as insightful to you guys. It just got a little technical. So I really don't know how it rubbed off on the audience. But thank you. I mean, if there are, I don't know if we can do questions, if there are one or two, or we could, sorry, okay. Okay, I think, okay, will generative AI will make a huge difference? A lot more people agree as opposed to strongly agreeing. So I think this is amazing.
To me, there is my immediate reaction to this. It is still more in a testing phase in my mind in terms of how it can generate value out of it and how we have to be, especially for banking sector, it is about making sure that the use cases are far more productive.
Yeah.
There are many.
No, I think you're right. In fact, I think the use case simplification, just take a simple, you don't need to do rocket science on Gen AI, okay? Just look at your own statements. I mean, how many of us struggle to get saying, tell me, last 20 gross up of, SI instruction on bill payment or electricity bill. Or tell me when savings account interests have been done every year, because when I'm looking at tax computation, I keep adding up on this. Or tell me when did I go to a particular place of a particular restaurant. Simple generative AI stuff. You can just push a text, statement text, put it onto generative AI, give the prompt engineering to the customer actually. So I think, if you have to look, and there are many cases that are from fraud analytics, a lot of stuff that you can mine into the existing data and ask questions and be very precise. So I think the simplification of the use cases will drive the generative AI narrative to my mind. It is not about, it's going to kind of make some machine learning models and some new things will happen. I mean, that's not I think it's about simplification of the use cases actually.
Fair enough. So I think with that, we will conclude our session unless there are any questions from the audience. I think, can we just take one or two?
Hello. Hi. So my question was, what would you identify as the greatest challenge in this space? Is it cybersecurity?
I think that's a good question. I think we didn't cover security in our conversation. I think cybersecurity again has two connotations. One is of course the larger level, whether it is geopolitical hacking, whether it is basically state-sponsored hacking and stuff like that, right? Where how do banks protect themselves? For example, today some of the banks have also been national assets. They've been part of NCIPC now. So there's a lot of intelligence and cybersecurity based work that is done. Zero trust architecture is very, very, I would say upcoming in that sense. A lot of conversation around that. But I think the larger problem on cybersecurity is on basic fraud management. A large number of our customers are getting defrauded due to social engineering. It's a problem that is here, and it's a here and now problem. I don't think a lot of us are realizing. I mean, just to give you a background, we recently, and I speak about this case. There was a very interesting case where a hospital number was hacked, in a city in India, and the customers were calling this hospital to book an appointment. And while they're booking the appointment, they just got a small brochure or a form that was filled. The form had a embedded APK, which was forwarding SMSs actually. And then after that, a simple screen comes to put your UPI ID and password as a fake screen. This kind of fraud is started to happen in India. Using UPI is a very open system. So while we've had a great run on UPI, but it also means the proliferation has brought a lot of issues. So, co-browsing of your mobile apps, mirroring of your mobile applications, all these are very relevant fraud issues. So I think the banks have to learn to deal with this. So you cannot just kind of sit and say it's a social engineering attack. A lot of our senior citizens, for example, are getting impacted because of this. And I think banks are working on this. So today, if you look at it, there are new technologies like adaptive authentication, passwordless, applications. A lot of these are coming up, and this is going to be a huge challenge. So clearly, on the user behavior side itself, we have a lot of challenges to deal with. On the larger cybersecurity, I think quantum would be a very, very key. The minute quantum applications come in, security will be the first point of compromise. So the banks also have to think. We all say that it's 2 years, 3 years away. We all thought AI and ML is still some way away, but the pace at which it's grown. So I think some of these challenges are very upcoming. So, high processing capabilities using quantum compute will be a very large challenge for banks to deal with as we go along. So I think all in all, cybersecurity is a very central item. I mean, it's like one of the items where probably 30% of the technology board time goes today. Just to give you a little perspective, so it's very, very, I would say, relevant and very topical. I don't know, Mahesh, if you want to add that, but that's how we are seeing.
I think I fully echo what Ramesh was saying, and also important is in the increasing world of digital capabilities being extended into the customer's mobile device, the need to protect is very much imperative. And add to it is also coming in the new data privacy laws that are coming in. That's only going to add more weight to the fact that security is going to be the heart of everything that we design or implement or serve. So in my mind, I think, like Ramesh was mentioning, 30-35% of our budgets first is going to be towards security. And that is only going to be increasing given the fact that we are going to be protecting data and ensuring that it is always right up there to support and sustain the growth that any organization is looking at.
So this is actually going to get a little more complex because the entire digital public infrastructure push is going to further democratize private data of citizens, and somewhere the onus is going to come back here to be able to protect in transit at rest on a setup which is external to you, right? You need to connect and collaborate with the digital public infrastructure. I think it's just going to get a little complex. There was one more question, which,
Yeah. So, the impression, it's an undeniable fact that now the technology, it's driving, and the banking cannot survive, in the absence of technology. The very important characteristics, as you already said, that, it's a fast changing, and there is a constant need for upgradations, and that means it's spending on the technology constantly. Number two is the cyber risk, right? Which is also the intended and unintended consequences needs to be protected. So as one of the important stakeholders, just want to know, or can you give some color from the future perspective that vis-a-vis the kind of a profit a bank can make, right, as a sector as a whole, or maybe a particular bank, and the need for, spending on this technology, how much the profit is going to consume? Because without technology, the bank, we cannot imagine bank. So
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think, in fact, I'm just kind of going to present something tomorrow to another meeting, which is very relevant to the topic. See, if you see today, globally, if you look at it, the revenue to tech spend percentages were at, very low 2.5%, 3% across the industry. Some of the foreign banks were at 5-6%. That significantly has shifted to about 7 to 8% today over the last 1.5 years. Just to give you that map. Tech investments itself, they've gone up from a 1x to about 3x for every single bank, if you look at it. Okay. But I think there's a catch here. I just want to be very careful here, is the fact that how does the bank look at technology, in terms of investing into future and changing technologies vis-a-vis maintaining technology, because both of them are critical, but you can't spend all your money in maintaining a technology, and that too, in a manually intensive way, right? Because the legacy technologies are manually intensive in that sense. So I think most of the boards today are looking at it, the fact that the change the bank or the transformation, the strategic projects need to be given a far more weightage. But at the same time, you have to hold the existing infrastructure. It's a fine balance. So what we are seeing is nominal increase, or I think what I would call rational increases on the run the bank, and a steep curve increase on the change the bank. That is how the combination is coming up today. And like I mentioned today, you're seeing about 24 to 25% CAGR growth on a year-on basis on technology, just at a blended rate you have to look at it. So about 24-25% is what we are, in terms of the growth of the technology spends are going. So,
but Ramesh, in your view, what do you think is the right percentage of total cost of running the business on tech for the Indian context?
Yeah, I think there is no right number, Nagaraj. Every bank will have to calibrate it. See, it's also in the life cycle of the banks. It's not easy. This is a very, very pertinent question is asked, because there are banks which need to deal with a lot of obsolescence, a lot of maintenance of earlier legacy systems. So the technology budgets get sucked into. Because there is nothing that you can do. You have to go and pay the AMCs, you have to go and pay the link cost, you have to pay the AMC for the hardware. Those are done deals, right? At the same time, you also know as a CIO that if you don't change and you don't bring in a new technology, then you're not going to be market competitive. So to me, I think the boards have to start looking at it from these two dimensions. So do not try and run the bank, you catch up to a certain level. It's very important to catch up. You cannot do, because obsolescence has security issues, has resiliency issues. So I think you have to get to a state where you're saying, my run is okay now, and then you start kind of going steep.
So what you're ideally saying is that let's look at run the bank as an expense.
Yes.
But let's look at grow and innovate the bank as investment
exactly.
in initiatives, the way a VC would generally evaluate.
Exactly.
And then you have a value for
Absolutely.
the money which will come in the future. So there's a completely different switch you will need to now, sort of switch on as the management.
Absolutely. And change the bank also, one of the other aspects, I think I can ask Mahesh to also come in. Change the bank also means you're going to take out costs somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's a very important part to look at it. So, for example, can I do zero touch, zero people? Can I take out operations and bring in efficiency out there? Because a drop in the floor, it doesn't mean that you take out people. Most of the banks are very reasonable, humanly driven, but you redeploy the resources, right? So I think all change projects to me have a return on investments, inbuilt. I don't know, Mahesh, your thought, but that's very important to kind of keep these two buckets in my mind.
See, the way I look at it is, to add to what you're saying, Ramesh, for us, when you look at transformation itself, what we end up doing is, there's two parts. One is, what transformation can drive multi-X capabilities for the bank from a growth or risk management perspective. But there are also things which says that, how do I practically re-engineer some of the older ones and take out them and consolidate. I'll give you a simple example. Over time, as technology came on we kept on buying technologies. A bank will have about 14 or 15 onboarding applications. Frankly, each of them are in different tech space, different tech stack, and generates its own set of costs to us. So we are essentially now saying, hey, now I move to a new tech stack, which is essentially current in nature, but that means I'm going to sunset.
Yeah.
So that at least 12 out of 14 will get sunset, which means you save costs there. And probably given the fact that you're calibrating a new one, a new tech stack to scale, say a cloud technology, which allows you to scale and not fix your cost, we're going to create efficiencies there. So these are some, I would say, like what he said, recalibration of the way tech costs is currently being looked at is what we are into. And that's going to be across. You can't touch the core banking. We just discussed, you can't touch the core banking. That's not an easy game. But the wrappers around it, the API game plans, and these are areas where you touch and say, how do we start to take out costs and put extreme focus on efficiencies.
Yeah.
And now you have low code, no code platforms. How do you use them more effectively for your operational efficiencies? These are areas which we have to focus on.
Fantastic. So I think we are out of time. This has been a great discussion. At least thank you for that question, gentlemen. And this actually, at least I walk away with a vibe that a lot of these large banks are now thinking and behaving like startups, right? From talent pool to going to management and saying, hey, let's invest in this to create this value out, right? I mean, the way you would pitch to a VC, that as opposed to being cost centers which just automate processes, which was the practice of the yesteryears. So it's a great vibe we are leaving the stage with. Thank you so very much for being a patient listener to the conversation. I hope this was as exciting for you guys as it was at least for me. Thank you.